I'm Monica Maurer. I am returning today with part two of an initial blog post that I had done on keeping and creating connection during the COVID-19 quarantine. Today's topic is connection in marriage. And so the first one I just kind of presented overall relationships being really important to us and how we really want to stay connected during this time of isolation and relationship. But marriages are particularly being impacted by the space and time we're taking from other people and spending so much time in our homes with our spouse. And so I want to talk a little bit today about that and about ideas that we can do to try to generate health and connection and come out of this thing stronger than before instead of weaker in our spousal relationships. And so these complications are present in many cases because there's so much time together with some people in our households. And so we're experiencing distance and connection from others who are outside of our home, but inside of our home, especially with our spousal relationships, we're experiencing some complications. And we know that every relationship has issues. There's no perfect relationship. There's relationships we feel stronger or more connected to, and there's relationships we feel more distant from. So it's actually so common for marriage to be the most complicated and painful of all the relationships in our life. And so because of that, because it is the most meaningful, hopefully a lot of times, and then it's also the most complicated, we need some specialized strategies for creating emotional connection in marriage that makes us feel like this is a valuable relationship rather than a relationship that's bringing us down and detrimental to our emotional health. And so in the first blog that I wrote on this series, we talked about how the expectation for divorce rates increasing because of the pandemic is expected, but that doesn't have to be the case. We know that marriages are suffering more than usual because of this extra time together, and the distress maybe that was present before the quarantine is actually being amplified because we're together, and it's creating this a sense of pain, either because we are arguing or because the silence between us is even more acute and more obvious. So we're not experiencing the quality connections that we maybe did at the beginning of the relationship, or that we would hope to at times when we are together. So it leaves us feeling in pain and in distress, or just sadness and depression, discouragement and hopelessness. So it's a travesty that this person who was at one time our favorite person in all the world has now become our worst enemy. It seems confusing why we've grown so far apart. And we wonder if it's even possible to restore the breach that's present between us at this point. And how to even begin is such a confusing question. It may seem that it would be easier to step away from this relationship altogether and start a new life because the complications seem beyond repair. In some relationships, after all of this is over, the way of disconnect, even divorce or separation, may be inevitable. But in others, where there's maybe even just a glimmer of hope, we can choose to stay in the relationship and work toward restoration and connection. So I want to give some helpful ideas on how to make that restoration and connection happen, or how to at least get started on that path during this time together. So when we think about it, we've been at home at least 4 weeks by now. Some started sooner and some started later. And some people are still going out to work, but coming back and trying to stay healthy and well rested. And so our old normal seems to be slipping away, and a new normal seems to be setting in. And I think for this new normal setting in for relationships and in marriages, we want to be thinking about implementing some ideas to just get us through this time in order that we can try to restore connection at some point in the very near future. It might be baby steps moving forward, but here are some ideas that I've thought about and want to present today that could be helpful as people are just getting through this time and wanting to have a plan to thrive again in their marriages. So the first thing that we can think about is just trying to mind our manners with one another. You know, you are married to another human, and just by nature of them being a human, they're worthy of love and respect. No matter what has happened between you, it's not healthy or appropriate for you to treat your spouse with disregard, rudeness, or even cruelty, or abusive language, or abusive behavior. We wouldn't treat a stranger the way that we sometimes treat our spouse. And so it's important for us to adjust our behavior and practice self-control with our spouse. I love how Dr. Wilder talks about the idea of protecting others from ourselves. So sometimes our anger and our feelings of disconnect or our upset with our spouse causes us to act in ways that aren't protecting them from ourselves, and we need to take a step back. So an action step would be to think about things that you've said or done to or against your spouse. Think about things that you've said or done that you regret. And ask your partner for forgiveness and make a commitment to stop saying those kinds of words and behaviors. Make a commitment to take yourself out of situations, take a breather, take a rest. Get a good book. The Gottmans have a lot of marriage books. The 4 Habits of a Joy-Filled Marriage is a great book. Transforming Fellowship is a great book on just brain relational skills and how to engage with your spouse in a way that's life-giving instead of providing destruction to that relationship. There's tons of good podcasts you can grab. Get on the phone or on the telehealth with one of us therapists, or call your pastor or a trusted mentor, somebody who has been married maybe a bit longer than you, or whose marriage you want to implement, and call them and ask for direction. Talk to them about the things that are happening and see if you can get some advice or at least some thoughts, some helpful hints on how they have cultivated their own marriage. And see if you can move towards stopping this unhealthy pattern of communication. The second thing that I would present today is this idea of trying to see accurately instead of seeing through a wounded lens. As humans, our response to pain is to act as a wounded person, which I'll also refer to as a wounded part of self. When we're in this wounded part, we say or do things that aren't like our true or best part. We actually fell in love with the true part of this other individual, and they fell in love with our true part. As the wounded parts of us come to the surface, the feeling of love goes dormant. And we may think that we're falling out of love, but this experience of disconnect is actually true in any relationship. It takes a lot of work to feel positive feelings and maintain healthy connection in marriage. Remind yourself who you really are, and remind yourself who your spouse really is, so that you can keep the relationship bigger than the problem in the marriage. This may help you to get the perspective that you need to stay on track. So an action step here is to write down a list of true self characteristics for both yourself and your spouse. So making a list of positive character attributes for yourself and for your spouse, asking yourself the questions, who is this person really? When they aren't angry or upset, and when they are engaged in a relational way, how do they act? What character attributes attracted you to them? Or how do you see them interacting maybe with the children or in the community when they're not angry or upset, like they are in arguments or the disconnects that you have experienced together? Read through these lists daily to remind yourself and keep of the healthy perspective, in order to keep the healthy perspective. And then that perspective will become more dominant in your mind. The third concept for today is the idea of showing appreciation. The best way to restore peace within a marriage is to practice being appreciative. The Gottman method teaches that couples are either in positive sentiment override or negative sentiment override in their relationship. It's the difference of having money in your relational bank account versus having an overdraft in your relational bank account. You can restore positivity to your relationship most simply by practicing appreciation. A lot of appreciation for little things will turn the tide of the relationship in the right direction. Think about the things your partner's doing right, okay? This is our action step for today. What is your partner doing right? Communicate things from the past or things in the present that are character qualities or actions that you appreciate, things that your partner has done or said, or behavior that you've noticed that you really like and that you appreciate. You can communicate to your spouse in person, in real time, which is the best if you can do it, or you could send them a text or a voicemail or a video or write a card or a letter. Of course, the in-person real time is the best option, but don't limit yourself if that feels too difficult, or if you're already doing that, try a different method just to make some variety in the marriage. Daily appreciation is needed to keep your relationship moving in the right direction. And if you make this a habit by choosing a regular time of day or a method of communicating, and you don't miss even one day telling your spouse the positive things that he or she has done or said, you will be investing in that relational bank account. Starting or ending your day with appreciation will move the marriage forward. It's a good idea. It's simple in one aspect and complicated in the next, because you have to push through some of the negative emotion you'll feel in trying to do this, but it's well worth it if you invest in this way. The fourth thing I'll talk about today is the idea of not always having to talk about the problems. In marriage, we talk a lot about verbal communication and conflict resolution being super important. And in therapy, we practice those skills. But part of getting healthy in marriage involves being quiet together. Relationships are often in such a complicated space that simple quiet is needed to restore a relational bond. In fact, Dr. James Wilder, who I mentioned earlier, talks about quieting together being the birthplace of bonding. Just like when a baby is born and they nurse at their mother's breast, they're bonding to their mothers, and there's no conversation that's happening in that space. So if we go back to those essential first steps of how a human bonds to another person, we will find that being quiet with one another in marriage will restore that place of tenderness and connection. If your marriage bond has been impaired, being together in quiet appreciation can make all the difference in the world. There is time to learn communication strategies and get the help you need with conflict resolution on these gridlocked issues, and we would love to help as therapists. However, if you can put the big issues to the side for the moment and let your minds and bodies rest together, you will find that your heart begins to heal. This will give you strength for the next steps of marital transformation. So here's the action step for quieting together. A few ideas for quieting together as follows. So first of all, you could sit on the couch without the television on, or you could lie closely in bed and just listen to the breathing of your spouse. You could take a walk without talking, or work on a project together with each person just quietly playing their role. As you do one of these things, focus on your breathing and let the awareness of the negative tension that's been building between you come into your mind. Make the choice to release that negative tension or energy by recalling the positive things about the other person. Maybe you could use that list you made from earlier in our conversation. Focus on the positive, simplify your thoughts. Don't get complicated. Don't get overrun with lots of negative thoughts and bad memories. Allow your body and mind to rest in the presence of your partner. Peaceful physical touch is recommended, but it doesn't have to be there if you're just starting out. it would be such a gift to come out of this pandemic better and stronger in our marriages than before. You can grow stronger and more connected, as well as positioning yourself for full healing and restoration of your relationship. All your complications can't be healed overnight, but taking one small step in the right direction on a daily basis can change the trajectory of your relationship for the long term. So I look forward to talking with you again soon for part 3 of this vlog series. Part 3 will be on parenting and family relationships. So I will talk to you again soon, and have a good evening.